In 1955, a Pennsylvania farmer stumbled upon something buried in a hillside that would eventually challenge everything we thought we knew about human history in America. What he found beneath that rock shelter would spark decades of controversy, debate, and ultimately a revolution in how archaeologists understand when people first arrived on this continent. And the story is far from over. His name was Albert Miller, and he was a man of curiosity and genuine intellectual conviction. Living on his family farm near Avella in Washington County, Pennsylvania, Miller wasn't just an ordinary farmer content with seasonal crops and livestock. He was a conservationist deeply committed to environmental restoration, an amateur historian fascinated by the human past, and an accomplished aerial photographer who had turned his land into a thriving wildlife habitat after painstakingly replanting trees across vast areas that had been devastated by intensive mining operations. His philosophy was reflected in how he approached everything, including antiquities and historical artifacts. As he once said, some people are interested in an antique chair because of the chair itself, but he was interested in the people who had sat in it. But on that fateful November day in 1955, it was a simple accident that would change everything and set in motion a chain of events that would revolutionize American archaeology. While hiking across his property, Miller stumbled upon a groundhog hole near a steep cliffside with a distinctive rock overhang that formed a natural shelter. What emerged from that hole was a clue to an ancient past buried literally beneath his feet. When Miller peered into the opening of the groundhog burrow, he noticed something extraordinary that immediately captured his attention. Artifacts were visible in the exposed soil layers, and these weren't modern objects or recent additions. Recognizing their potential historical significance from his knowledge of Native American cultures, Miller retrieved a shovel and a screen from his barn. He began to dig carefully and methodically, treating the task with the seriousness it deserved. Almost immediately, his patience and respect for the site were rewarded handsomely. From the earth came a flint knife of remarkable craftsmanship and burned bones that showed evidence of ancient fire, unmistakable. Evidence that humans had lived in this location thousands of years ago. The quality and type of the knife suggested it was far older than any historical period documented for the region. Miller understood instinctively what he had found was profoundly important, but he also understood the value of caution and proper procedure. Rather than continuing his amateur excavation, which could potentially damage the archaeological context and destroy irreplaceable information, Miller made a crucial decision that reflected his integrity and wisdom. He carefully covered the hole and began a search that would take years, looking for a professional archaeologist who could properly assess the discovery with scientific rigor and expertise. For nearly 2 decades, Miller held onto his secret, carefully protecting the site from disturbance. He knew that proper scientific investigation required expertise and methodology that only trained professionals could provide. This decision would prove to be absolutely vital. The patience and wisdom that Miller demonstrated reflects the ethical approach that archaeology demands. Finally, in 1973, Miller connected with Dr. James Adavazio, an anthropology professor at the University of Pittsburgh, who was fascinated by rock shelters and prehistoric human habitation. When Adavazio arrived at Miller's farm and examined the flint knife that had been discovered so many years earlier, he was astonished. Adavazio immediately recognized the significance of the site. This wasn't just another rock shelter with some scattered artifacts. The geological formations, the stratigraphy of the soil layers, and the quality of the artifacts suggested something far more profound. Miller showed Adavazio the exact location where the groundhog hole had exposed the treasures, and the archaeologist's trained eye could see the potential immediately. This marked the beginning of one of the most important archaeological investigations in North American history. The rock shelter itself is a geological marvel. Over thousands of years, the water from Cross Creek had carved out a natural overhang from the yellow sandstone cliffs. The shelter is perched high above the creek, providing the perfect location for prehistoric peoples. They would have been safe from flooding while maintaining convenient access to fresh water. The location also provided excellent visibility of the surrounding landscape, allowing hunters to observe movement and plan their expeditions. The shelter offered protection from harsh weather, and the overhang would have created a comfortable space for families to gather, craft tools, and process food. When Dr. Adavazio began his systematic excavation in 1973, he didn't know just how deep the deposits went or how old their remains would prove to be. As the digging progressed, layer after layer of human occupation emerged from the ground, each one more remarkable than the last. Adavazio assembled a team of dedicated researchers and students from the University of Pittsburgh who shared his commitment to rigorous scientific investigation. These researchers understood they were working with an extraordinarily complex archaeological site that demanded meticulous attention to detail and careful documentation. The stratigraphy, the careful layering of different time periods stacked one atop another, would be absolutely key to understanding the chronology of human habitation at the site. Each layer represented a different era with distinct artifacts that told stories of human adaptation and survival. across countless millennia. The earliest layers were particularly important because they pushed back the timeline of human presence in North America farther than anyone had previously documented. These deepest deposits contained simple stone tools, evidence of fire use, and faunal remains that suggested hunting and gathering subsistence strategies perfectly adapted to local conditions. The excavations revealed something that fundamentally challenged the accepted archaeological narrative of the time. Deep within the rock shelter, beneath multiple layers of occupation, lay evidence suggesting that humans had inhabited this site for an almost continuous period spanning nearly 19,000 years. Some radiocarbon dating placed the earliest occupation at approximately 16,000 years ago in radiocarbon years, which translates to roughly 19,000 calendar years before present. This was groundbreaking because it contradicted what had become the dominant paradigm in American archaeology. For decades, the accepted theory held that the first humans to arrive in North America came during what archaeologists called the Clovis period, approximately 13,000 years ago. This theory suggested that people crossed from Asia into North America via a land bridge called Beringia, and then migrated southward, eventually establishing the Clovis culture known for distinctive, fluted projectile points. The Clovis first model had become so entrenched in archaeological thinking that it was treated almost as gospel. Any evidence suggesting earlier human presence was dismissed or ignored. Archaeologists who proposed pre-Clovis dates faced serious skepticism and career risk. But Meadowcroft was different. The evidence was overwhelming and systematic. Adaptation and his team documented layers of occupation with meticulous precision. They collected artifacts at every level, including pottery, bifaces, lamellar blades, lanceolate projectile points, and countless pieces of chipping debris from tool manufacture. They collected charcoal samples for radiocarbon dating. They documented the presence of over 149 different plant and animal species throughout the site's history, including elk, deer, turkey, and even the extinct passenger pigeon. These weren't random findings or questionable artifacts. This was comprehensive, methodical, scientific evidence. The artifacts themselves told stories of sophistication and adaptation. The tools showed evidence of careful manufacture and specialized design for different purposes. The presence of specific projectile points indicated that hunters were targeting particular game animals. The discovery of seeds and nuts suggested that plant gathering was an important part of the diet. The presence of fish bones indicated exploitation of aquatic resources. Over time, the composition of the faunal remains shifted, suggesting that hunting techniques and target animals changed across the millennia. This pattern of change was consistent with what one would expect from a site, showing continuous or intermittent occupation across thousands of years. Adaptation spent years conducting the excavations, carefully documenting every layer and every artifact. He published his findings in academic journals and presented his research at archaeological conferences. But the reception was often hostile. Established scholars who had built careers on the Clovis first model weren't eager to accept evidence that undermined their life's work. Meadowcroft was criticized on various grounds. Some argued that the site had been contaminated by modern carbon, which would skew the radiocarbon dates. Others suggested that intrusive materials from later periods had been incorporated into deeper layers. Some questioned whether Adaptation's team had properly understood the site's stratigraphy. The criticism was relentless, but Adaptation persisted. He defended his findings methodically and scientifically. He acknowledged the concerns raised by his critics and addressed them with additional research and analysis. He conducted more radiocarbon dating using improved techniques. He examined the stratigraphy more carefully. He consulted with other experts to verify the chronology and the artifact classifications. Over time, despite the initial skepticism, the academic community began to recognize that Meadowcroft represented genuine pre-Clovis evidence. This shift in perspective was gradual, but ultimately profound. As the 1980s and 1990s progressed, other archaeological sites began producing similar evidence of pre-Clovis occupation. Monteverde in Chile showed human occupation dating to at least 15,000 years ago. Other North American sites began producing convincing pre-Clovis dates. The weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. The Clovis first paradigm, which had dominated American archaeology for so long, began to crumble. Archaeologists realized that the first human inhabitants of the Americas must have arrived much earlier than previously thought, possibly before the last glacial maximum, and perhaps through multiple migration routes. Genetic evidence also began to support the pre-Clovis timeline. Mitochondrial DNA studies suggested that human populations in the Americas diverged from Asian populations much earlier than the Clovis period would allow. Later ancient DNA studies from skeletal remains and paleogenomic research confirmed that human migration into the Americas must have occurred at least 15 to 20,000 years ago, and possibly earlier. The genetic data aligned with what Meadowcroft and other archaeological sites were telling us. The first Americans didn't arrive during the Clovis period. They arrived much earlier, and they developed sophisticated cultures over thousands of years before Clovis peoples appeared. Recent discoveries have pushed the timeline back even further. At White Sands, in New Mexico, archaeologists identified human footprints preserved in ancient lake beds using advanced dating techniques. These footprints have been dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago, suggesting that humans were present in North America during the last glacial maximum, a time when vast ice sheets covered much of the continent. This discovery fundamentally transforms our understanding of human migration and adaptation. It suggests that the first Americans were incredibly resourceful and capable of surviving in extremely challenging environments. As for Meadowcroft itself, the research continues. The site remains an active archaeological investigation. In 2024 and 2025, new excavations have been undertaken, focusing on the eastern profile of the rock shelter. These contemporary digs employ cutting-edge technology that was unavailable to Adaptation in the 1970s. Researchers are using advanced LiDAR technology to create high-definition three-dimensional scans of the excavation area. This allows for unprecedented documentation of the site's physical features and the precise location of artifacts within the stratigraphy. These scans create permanent records that future researchers can study and analyze even after the excavation is complete. The recent excavations have revealed additional artifacts that add to our understanding of the site's history. In August of 2025, archaeologists uncovered several prehistoric items during the ongoing work. These include a flint tool estimated to be over 3,000 years old, along with charcoal, seeds, and small mammal bones. Each of these finds contributes to a broader picture of how people lived at this location across different time periods. The charcoal provides material for radiocarbon dating, which helps establish chronology. The seeds reveal information about plant use and availability. The bones tell us about hunting practices and diet. The flint tools demonstrate technological knowledge and craftsmanship. Dr. James Adavazio, now in his later years, continues to be involved in research at Meadowcroft. His decades of expertise and intimate knowledge of the site prove invaluable to new researchers. Contemporary archaeologists work alongside Adavazio, learning from his experience while bringing new methodologies and technology to bear. This represents an ideal collaboration between generations of scientists. Young researchers benefit from mentorship and access to unparalleled knowledge, while experienced researchers gain access to tools and techniques that allow them to re-examine their previous findings and ask new questions about the data they've already collected. The excavation team includes specialists in various fields of archaeological science. There are stratigraphers who specialize in understanding soil layers and site formation processes. There are faunal analysts who study animal bones and reconstruct diet and hunting practices. There are paleobotanists who examine plant remains and reconstruct the ancient environment. There are geoarchaeologists who study the geological context of the site. There are specialists in lithic analysis who examine stone tools and understand how they were made and used. The multidisciplinary approach provides a much richer and more complete understanding of the past than any single specialty could achieve alone. The implications of Meadowcroft and the broader pre-Clovis evidence are profound for our understanding of human history. The first Americans weren't a simple unified population arriving from a single source at a single time. They were diverse peoples with different origins, different routes of arrival, and different adaptations to different environments. Some may have arrived by crossing Beringia during periods of lower sea level. Others may have traveled along the Pacific coast, exploiting marine resources and island hopping southward. Some may have even arrived by boat or paddled across open ocean. The diversity of routes and timing explains the remarkable diversity of Native American languages, cultures, and genetic lineages that existed when Europeans arrived in the Americas. The pre-Clovis peoples of North America didn't simply exist in isolated pockets and disappear. They developed increasingly sophisticated cultures over thousands of years. They adapted to diverse environments, from Arctic tundra to temperate forests to deserts. They developed specialized tools and techniques for exploiting local resources. They established trade networks that allowed goods and ideas to flow across vast distances. They created art, developed spiritual beliefs, and formed complex societies. By the time the Clovis culture appeared 13,000 years ago, the Americas were already home to well-established human populations with thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and cultural development. Meadowcroft provides a window into one location's long human history. The rock shelter was used intermittently across thousands of years. During wetter periods, when the surrounding landscape provided abundant game and plant resources, the rock shelter may have been used more frequently. During drier periods, or when game was scarce, use may have been seasonal or temporary. Over time, technologies changed. The earliest tools were simple and crude by later standards, but they were effective for their purpose. Gradually, toolkits became more specialized, hunting weapons became more sophisticated, food processing techniques improved. The record preserved in the rock shelter layers documents this technological and cultural evolution. The rock shelter ultimately continued to be used by Native Americans for thousands of years after the earliest occupation. Archaeological evidence suggests that indigenous peoples used the site until approximately 700 years ago. During the European colonial period and into the 18th century, the site saw occasional use by Native Americans and European settlers. By the time Albert Miller owned the property in the 20th century, the rock shelter's archaeological significance had been forgotten by the local population, though the site itself remained, waiting for someone curious enough to look closely at a groundhog hole. The story of Meadowcroft is also a story about scientific persistence in the face of skepticism. Adaptation was willing to defend his findings for years, even as the broader archaeological community dismissed his work. He gathered more evidence, conducted additional analyses, and refined his interpretations. He was honest about limitations and uncertainties while standing firm on the core findings. This is how science advances. It requires both openness to challenge and persistence in defending findings that are supported by evidence. It requires researchers who are willing to risk their reputations for what they believe to be true. Adaptation's career was strengthened, not weakened, by his willingness to challenge the dominant paradigm. The Clovis first paradigm shift also illustrates something important about how scientific knowledge evolves. For decades, Clovis first was treated as established fact, almost beyond question. Textbooks were written asserting it as truth. Students were taught it as certainty. Yet it proved to be wrong, or at least incomplete. This doesn't mean that science had failed. Rather, it means that science was working exactly as it should. Scientists gather evidence, form hypotheses, test those hypotheses, and revise their understanding when new evidence demands it. The scientific method is self-correcting over time. As better evidence accumulates, and as new technologies allow us to examine evidence more carefully, our understanding improves. The technological advances that have transformed archaeological research since Adaptation's original excavations are remarkable. Radiocarbon dating has been refined and improved, reducing uncertainty in age estimates. Accelerator mass spectrometry allows dating of much smaller samples. DNA extraction and analysis, which didn't exist in the 1970s, now allows researchers to identify species from bone fragments and to extract ancient human DNA. Isotopic analysis of bones can reveal diet and residence patterns. Ground-penetrating radar can detect features beneath the surface without excavation. Three-dimensional scanning and modeling allow precise documentation of sites. Paleogenomic research reveals population movements and admixture events. Each of these tools adds a new dimension to archaeological understanding. Meadowcroft's significance extends beyond its role in documenting pre-Clovis presence in North America. The site is also important for understanding long-term human-environment interaction. The stratigraphic record at Meadowcroft preserves evidence of environmental change across 19,000 years. The composition of pollen in soil layers reveals vegetation patterns. The types of animals represented in faunal assemblages reveal changes in fauna. Soil development in different layers indicates shifts in moisture and temperature. By correlating archaeological evidence with paleo-environmental data, researchers can understand how humans adapted to environmental changes. During wetter periods, the rock shelter may have been used more intensively. During droughts or climate shifts, use patterns may have changed. Understanding these adaptations is crucial for understanding how humans survive and thrive across environmental variability. The rock shelter has also provided evidence regarding early plant use in North America. Among the discoveries at Meadowcroft are macrobotanical remains of maize or corn recovered from higher soil layers, dating to as early as the 4th century before Christ. This is significant because maize is associated with agricultural development in North America. The presence of maize at Meadowcroft so early indicates that the transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture occurred earlier than previously thought in this region. However, the maize remains coexist with evidence of continued hunting and gathering, suggesting a long period of transition where both subsistence strategies were employed simultaneously. This pattern, often called the long transition to agriculture, is characteristic of the adoption of farming in various regions around the world. The discovery and ongoing study of Meadowcroft has inspired archaeological research at numerous other sites in Pennsylvania and across North America. Archaeologists recognize that if pre-Clovis evidence existed at Meadowcroft, it was likely to exist at other rock shelters and open-air sites throughout the region. Subsequent surveys and excavations have indeed found evidence of pre-Clovis occupation at multiple locations. Pennsylvania has proven to be particularly rich in pre-Clovis archaeological sites. This concentration of sites in the mid-Atlantic region suggests that this area was particularly favorable for human habitation during the late Pleistocene and early Holocene. The resources were abundant, the climate was not as harsh as farther north, and the landscape provided diverse opportunities for subsistence. Today, Meadowcroft Rock Shelter functions not only as an active archaeological site, but also as a public museum and educational facility. The site is managed as the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter and Historic Village, a National Historic Landmark that attracts thousands of visitors annually from around the world. The modern shelter, constructed in the early 2000s to protect the archaeological deposits from weathering while allowing public access, allows visitors to see the actual excavation and to understand the archaeological work being conducted. Interpretive signs explain the site's significance and the evidence for pre-Clovis occupation. The site includes reconstructions of prehistoric and historic villages, allowing visitors to imagine how people lived at different periods. Visiting Meadowcroft provides a powerful connection to the deep human past. Standing at the rock shelter, one can see the same cliff overhang that sheltered hunters and gatherers thousands of years ago. The same views of the landscape that ancient peoples observed are still visible. The creek that provided water and food is still flowing. Despite profound changes in the climate, vegetation, fauna, and human cultures, the basic geographic and ecological features of the location remain recognizable. This continuity across millennia creates a tangible link to the past that reading about archaeology in textbooks cannot provide. The story of Meadowcroft also highlights the importance of land stewardship and the preservation of archaeological sites. If Albert Miller had not carefully protected the site when he first discovered it, if he had not sought out professional archaeologists rather than excavating it himself, if the site had been disturbed or destroyed by development, this crucial window into the American past would have been lost forever. Archaeological sites are non-renewable resources. Once they are excavated or destroyed, they cannot be replaced. The artifacts and information they contain are available only once. This places a tremendous responsibility on contemporary society to protect and properly study significant archaeological sites. The ongoing excavations at Meadowcroft continue to yield insights and raise new questions. Recent work has focused on recovering and analyzing sediment samples from the deepest layers of occupation. Researchers are examining these samples using advanced techniques to search for evidence of ancient human DNA. If human DNA can be recovered and sequenced from sediment samples at Meadowcroft, this could provide direct evidence of the genetic ancestry of the people who occupied the site thousands of years ago. This would represent a remarkable scientific achievement and would provide new perspectives on population movements, admixture, and adaptation across the Americas. Other aspects of ongoing research at Meadowcroft involve re-examination of artifacts that were collected decades ago and are now housed in museum collections. With modern dating techniques, researchers can obtain new age estimates for previously collected materials. With modern analytical techniques, they can extract information that was not available to earlier researchers. Computer modeling and statistical analysis allow researchers to identify patterns in the spatial distribution of artifacts that might have been missed by earlier workers. In this way, even artifacts that were excavated and cataloged decades ago continue to provide new information as research methods improve. The broader implications of the pre-Clovis evidence continue to unfold. The recognition that humans arrived in the Americas much earlier than previously thought forces a reconsideration of human migration patterns during the last glacial period. It suggests that humans were far more capable and adaptive than some earlier researchers had assumed. It indicates that maritime technology was more sophisticated than the prevailing archaeological consensus had acknowledged. It requires models of human migrations that account for rapid dispersal across vast distances and successful colonization of diverse environments. These insights have implications not just for understanding the Americas, but for understanding human dispersal globally during the late Pleistocene. The research at Meadowcroft has also contributed to a broader reconciliation between archaeological science and Native American peoples and their descendants. Modern Native Americans have long held oral traditions and historical records indicating that their ancestors had inhabited North America for many thousands of years. Western science had largely dismissed these traditions as mythology or legend. The pre-Clovis evidence now validates what Native American peoples had always known. This has led to improved relationships and collaborations between archaeologists and Native American communities. Many contemporary archaeological projects, including work at Meadowcroft, involve consultation and partnership with Native American groups. This collaborative approach respects Native American perspectives and ensures that archaeological research is conducted in ways that are sensitive to cultural values and concerns. As research at Meadowcroft continues into the future, the site will undoubtedly continue to yield new insights and surprises. The rock shelter's stratigraphic complexity, the abundance of organic remains, the extensive size of the deposits, and the long chronology of occupation make it an exceptionally rich archaeological resource. With each new excavation season, with each application of new technology, with each analysis of collected materials, our understanding of the people who occupied this site and the broader context of early American prehistory becomes more detailed and more nuanced. Meadowcroft will continue to be a crucial site for understanding the first Americans and the deep human history of North America. The story that began when Albert Miller looked into a groundhog hole in 1955 continues to unfold more than 70 years later. What he discovered wasn't just artifacts or evidence of ancient occupation. He discovered a portal to understanding a crucial chapter of human history, a chapter that had been largely invisible to modern scholarship. The rock shelter that sheltered hunters and gatherers 19,000 years ago now shelters knowledge about them, preserving their traces and the evidence of their presence across millennia. As we continue to study Meadowcroft and related sites, we gain a deeper and more complete understanding of who the first Americans were, when they arrived, how they adapted to their environments, and how they laid the foundations for the diverse Native American civilizations that flourished in the Americas when Europeans arrived. The Pennsylvania Cliffside dig hasn't finished rewriting the first American timeline. It continues to rewrite it with each new discovery, each new analysis, each new insight that emerges from careful, dedicated scientific research. The story of human presence in the Americas is deeper and richer and more complex than anyone had imagined, and Meadowcroft remains at the center of that unfolding narrative.